Well, welcome to Leeds. As you can tell, I'm obviously from Yorkshire, but I'm passionate about Temple Works Leeds, and it very deliberately has the word Leeds at the end of its name. If you don't know Leeds at all, you won't know possibly that a 10-minute walk from here was the heart of the second industrial revolution in Holbeck, which is probably Leeds' poorest borough now, but absolutely full of history and living heritage. Heritage is contemporary. The most amazing place down there is Temple Works, a grade 1 listed 14-acre site now, and I read you out something that Rebecca Wade, our industrial historian, wrote about this amazing place. Temple Works was a radical space in the 19th century, and it remains a radical space into the 21st. This monster room, as it was styled by the writer George Dodd in 1852, continues to be an arresting spectacle, a functional folly and upside-down contradiction of the very best sort. It speaks of industrial innovation of Victorian Leeds, manufacturing, capital, and culture. But this voice is not a singular one, nor does it only speak of past glories. Temple Works is a vessel for multiple narratives and plural histories, and its value lies both in its unique material fabric and in the fabric of the stories woven by generations of working people that have occupied and continue to occupy its spaces to this day, not in spite of the building in its present state of decay, but because of it. To return to Dodd's prescient description, how much mind, how much capital, how much labor must have been thrown into such an assemblage? How do we here trace the accumulation of many years' experience, the bringing to bear upon one object of so many distinct agencies and sources of power, mental and material, social and commercial? In the 160 years since this was written, these accumulations of experience have proliferated and diversified. It is not just the individual agency of John Marshall as owner or Joseph and Ignatius Bonomis as the architects that inform the history, value, interpretation of this site. It is also the successive generations of women, men, and children from South Leeds that made their lives here, from the flax spinners of the first incarnation to the employers of Kay's catalogue, 50 years here, and various makers that are currently animating the spaces and acting as stewards and custodians. So this is Temple Works today. It looks exactly like it did before, but minus the sheep and the grass. The sheep who mowed the lawn, known as the worker sheep. This was the first completely sustainable industrial building. Sedum roof, worker sheep, a lift for the sheep, and these giant skylights, focused and intense solar gain, and a warm, steady moisture of 78 degrees Fahrenheit down into the very shallow section mill floor, because flax is almost impossible to see and it breaks very easily. So this was absolutely revolutionary engineering. It was also a bit of a bodge job in some ways, and if you ever come around for a tour, I'll explain what they did wrong in engineering terms, but it is a stunning place. This is the main floor today, as beautiful as the Milan Galleria, but with a significant structural issue, which we only realized when we started on the project in 2008, when there was a small but significant structural failure, which has kept us from using this space, in effect, as our Tate Modern Turbine Hall of the North, which is what we came on the project to do. I represent a cultural regeneration company, and part of what we look at, obviously, is the most recent occupants and what they can tell us about the place. Kay's catalogue was here for 50 years, and when it left, there was a cusp. There was several years of wrangling about planning, which we helped the owners get planning permission, but bits of the building started to decay. The fifth lower right-hand building was torn down in 2005 to make way for a big mixed-use development. Another building from the 50s, charmingly called Reality, was ready to make way, but it's holding up one of the main buildings. So there's sort of 4 buildings all kind of vaguely holding each other up. Inside, when we inherited all the buildings properly to start working in there as a cultural project, 2008, 2009, they were in pretty parlous shape. We cleaned them out, did all the maintenance, and then we stripped everything away that was modern, any suspended ceiling, anything that was causing damp, anything that would make it look of a particular time, because we knew the place was going to be worth its weight in gold as location hire for film, television, and photography. And that these wonderful underground spaces, we use all the toilets, the loading bays, all the old workshops, that all of these spaces would have a use right down to the last inch while we waited to use the very big main space. These are panoramic shots of some of our spaces over the last couple of years. So inspired by the spirit of extreme industrial invention, and that's our rallying call. Extreme is our word. That and toilets. This was our first, we only have one. This was our first very big sound and light show, 2009, where we animated the main space. It was so popular, it kept on for 10 nights. People came to see it from all over, and that's when our first curators decided, in effect, what our angle was going to be, and it's inspiration from the spirit of extreme invention. Everyone at Temple Works is a maker. Now, all these people didn't turn up all in the first few months. They've been coming on and off for the last several years, but we now have 65 residents, including our major heritage residents, Leeds Motor Railway Society, formed in 1947 with some of the original members. We have artists coming in from New York, from South America, all over England, many from China, Taiwan, and again, they're all attracted by this one thing we've decided we were going to do. So everything is team and collaborative working, but make no mistake, we're not a community group. We are a project. We consider ourselves commercially savvy. We consider ourselves a building, and we're looking to make this into a much longer-term working place. All heritage is contemporary, and again, that's another one of our rallying calls. It's got 24/7 use. People are there all night, most nights, every weekend, rehearsing, putting work together, building something, working with each other. Our niche also, apart from extreme makers, it's also extreme communities. So when we did our supply and demand audit in 2008, we realized where the gap was. Leeds is actually very mainstream. It's well catered for when it comes to that. But there's nowhere for the fetish community to go. There's nowhere for the huge African music communities to go. There are all sorts, which they've got nowhere to go. And so we welcome to Temple Works. And they have been some of the most successful curators and businesses. Likewise, there's a large community in the north of narrative live artists, also known as graffiti artists. Joy Gilliard is the leader, and she's curated all of the live art animation at Temple Works. We receive no funding deliberately. We're tied to no one. The council has nothing to say to us or do with us. We're happy with that. We do occasionally get Arts Council funding when we put on very good festivals of collaboration and performance, but we don't rely on any of that. What we do, however, is test and harvest acoustics, harvest light to create work which then can be something which is saleable. So what we say is we're not doing a meanwhile use. We're not a community group. These are not provisional activities. There are multiple layers. It's an active palimpsest. When we strip something away, we put something back, but we always leave the last one peeking out. It's both a singular activity and a multiplicity of activities. It's a process and an agreed practice that we do as curators, and it's totally revenue-based. So we make money off booze. It's Yorkshire. Booze, tickets, location hire, and then when we have a very big sponsor like Jamie Reid, who put the safety pin on the Queen's nose, who came here for about 6 weeks, 2 years ago, he helped us build a whole new platform of punk situationism, anti-capitalism. That then brought us into the death metal community. You get the general picture. So we do have very big festivals of punk and death metal, and again, that is living heritage too. National road shows, there are some completely commercial, often quite venal road shows, which everyone really enjoys, like 2.8 hours later, we attract an awful lot of zombies, vampires, sci-fi chase scenes, etc. But it's a good source of money. Third-party promoters, we don't do club, we don't do second-year student stuff, but we do very good quality jungle, hip-hop, trip-hop, flux, techno, ambient electronica, and goes on for several weeks. Our international commitments are quite extreme, again, the word, but if we didn't have, for instance, our ex-students in Taiwan working for us, we would have no website. They actually keep the website under control. So the power of interns, stewards, and volunteers is really what keeps everything going. There's no paid staff. We all run our own businesses, and we rely on people learning their businesses as part of this. Continually animating the process is really important too, so that people know, yes, it's a wonderful historic place, but there are actual live people in there. It's not dead in there, it's not decaying. All the extreme communities who come to work with us bring their own audiences as well. This is Chakala VIP Makosa. Promoting new young artists, in many cases for free, brings us in new audiences that we need as well. Finally, we have open days continually. We tour people around continually. Because it's a building site, they have to be accompanied. But the K's connection lives to this day. We have had artists and curators who were ex-K's, And people, when Kay's closed at the end of 2004, it was the largest single employer in South Leeds, so it left a huge gap. Partnership working for us is a natural thing. We work with Culture Vulture, the North's biggest cultural website, No Gloss Film Festival, independent films from around the world in a couple of weeks, University of Leeds, Superposition, the scientific group, and Old Chapel Studios, who've given us Duran's old speakers, so that's always a big thing. Hunslet and Holbeck Heritage Project, run by Ignite and University of Leeds, has been an absolute godsend as well. There's so many people in similar positions to us who have equipment we need and vice versa. So the current sources of revenue, just to be clear, I was asked to talk about that. Film development from scratch, here's Danny North. Location hire for much bigger shoots, here's BBC Frankenstein's Wedding. We just had Utopia and DCI Bank shot. Advertising shoots, lucky enough to meet Jessica Ennis. International niche festivals, death metal of course. And moving forward in the main space, we're looking at the big commercial development of a lot of this kind of culture. We're working with our long-term theatrical partner, Shunt from London, from underneath London Bridge, where it's big immersive theatre. The big space doesn't take normal acoustics. It's extremely echoey, so things you have, in effect, have to build on it. It's 80,000 square feet, so it takes a lot of immersion. Working with international artists such as Il Pixel Ross, who has already been around, who does the goggle developments of horrifying clowns, I have to warn you now. But we're approached by a lot of immersive film companies who want to put on secret cinema, future cinema. So we're looking at what can we do in a big way, which then also supports the artists who are already there. So it's a 4-part project. The Hive is the continuing developmental work by artists and curators. The Horus, Temple of Horus, Edfu, which is the temple, ongoing heritage and education work. The Highways is how we see collaborating in Holbeck with other projects, other developers, and the Hall is the new large-scale project. So our aim now is to create an artist and curator-led trust, heritage-led as well, to find public and private partners to carry out repairs and to build the project sustainably. And as of today, I'm obviously looking for a broker, hopefully free. But I was very interested to hear the earlier conversation. It's very apt for us. Thank you very much.
I'm from Meanwhile Space. We're a community interest company that is based in London, so I've had an early morning this morning, and I hope you'll forgive me if I stutter over some bits and pieces. So Meanwhile Uses is something that's very close to our heart. It's something that we pretty much invented around 6 years ago, looking at empty space that was everywhere. There were already people doing fantastic things around the country and internationally, but none of it was really joining up, and really all the opportunities of empty space were not really being realised as far as we were concerned. I wanted to say just here that for us it's not pop-up. It's really about the entire length that a building or piece of land is empty. We feel like pop-up is great, but it's really for brands, and increasingly it's commanding a much higher and higher rental. It's a lot of Nikes and Heinz beans and Marmite, and actually we think there's more of an opportunity for people who are startups and community groups and bringing something really interesting and alternative back to these empty spaces to use them for a longer period of time and really sort of create a much wider impact and nurture a sense of place. We've probably had around 1,100 tenants so far, and at the moment these are tenants in our spaces. They're all doing things like this. Most of them are startups, or they've been operating from their bedroom or kitchen table for a period of time. They're just looking for space to trial an idea, and we don't really determine the quality of that idea. We just provide the facility for them to do that. We're an enabling organisation. That's kind of how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as taking on space and facilitating it to become usable for people, and then building the capacity of people to use those spaces. That takes various different guises, and usually we're paid by local authorities to deliver contracts, local regeneration contracts that are heavily intensive on engagement, that really work with local people to come up with ideas and facilitate them to take those spaces on. We have a number of progression spaces. So once those spaces have stopped being funded by local authorities and people develop the capacity to be able to pay for the spaces themselves, then we take a small part of that as a means to continue the administration of those spaces. They're rent-free, so covering costs like business rates and utilities and insurance, and the landlord can have the building back when he needs it. So often we have them because they are awaiting planning permission, site developments, they really don't know what to do with them, and they're looking for a new commercial tenant. And we really nurture those relationships with landlords and build them and build trust with them so that we know and we can have the building right up until the very last moment and we're not kicked out 6 months before they need it. We really want to, and we've been very interested in carving out a new meanwhile industry within the property sector. And so a lot of what we do is about devising toolkits and systems so that to make it easier for people to use spaces, and we obviously work to influence government and the property industry to reduce those barriers. We formed in 2009, working with Jess Till, who I believe you heard from earlier today, when she was at the Development Trust Association to deliver the government's Meanwhile project, which sought out people who were already doing really exciting projects and found what was standing in their way of doing it again, and really brought all that together. Started to build a forum, and that forum and network is now 11,000 members of people who are interested in using space, have space available for people to use, and civil servants and local authority officers who are interested as well. There's been a number of developments throughout that time, and the sort of movement has really grown, and we're now looking at how we progress that and take on more ambitious projects. So instead of small shops, we're now taking on office buildings and former petrol stations and live-work projects, and really developing the ideas and pushing the boundaries of what we can achieve with this. So there's just a few bits and pieces about what we've achieved so far. We aren't funded. We're intentionally unfunded, so that gives us a flexibility to do what we feel is necessary, and a lot of our money is related to outputs, usually to do with people creating their own jobs, so it's employability and skills. I'll just run through very quickly 2 types of projects that we deliver. This one was in Wilton Green. It was an Outer London Fund project, and we took on an empty space and turned it into a sort of info hub for the project that we were working on the high street. We started by doing up different shops and working with existing traders to improve their shop fronts, and really our goal was to see how many empty spaces we could get hold of in the area. We ended up, just by chance really, coming across a landlord who was using this building for storage. He's a textile company just up the road, and everybody thought that it was dodgy, it was all closed down, but it was in fact in use. We persuaded him to give it to us, and he initially was only prepared to do that for 3 months, and we've now been there for nearly 3 years. It's about getting over those fears of the landlord and getting them to understand that it's not something to be scared of, and mitigating all the risks for them. And then we work with potential occupants of those spaces and help build capacity for what they might do within that space, get them to think collaboratively, get them to think really realistically about how much time they need to commit to using a visible space like this, and how they fit it out and how they stock it and what they hope to achieve from it. We had 200 people come to those proposal development workshops, and while this was all going on, we were working with trainees from the local college to progress their construction skills and do up some of the empty shops. We worked with a designer to oversee them and sort of bring the cohesive message together. There were 12 units that we were offering here, and we held a launch once we were ready. We rebranded it as Queen's Parade, and gave it a new lick of paint, and then held a proposal process for people to apply to use the space. And what we wanted them to do was come forward with ideas for how they were going to benefit the community, how they were going to benefit the local area, how they were going to not compete with local businesses, but they were going to enhance the offer locally. We wanted them to look at their supply chains, to look at workshops that they might deliver that would bring in local families and people who were not using these high streets. And so these were the first 13 that moved in. Interestingly, only one of those was a man. Most of the projects that come forward are led by women, and we don't really know why, but we think it's fantastic. A lot of return-to-work mums, a lot of people who are sort of part-time in different jobs and kind of collaborating with friends to come up with ideas and take their hobbies and passions and develop them into businesses. Mary Porters came to see us, and Time Out listed us as one of the top 10 shopping destinations in London within 2 months of opening. So that seemed a bit crazy to me, but was all good promotion. At the same time that we were developing that, and that, by the way, is still going, it's become follow-on space. So people are progressing slowly to being able to deliver, being able to pay rent, commercial rent, and the landlord is closer to planning permission, and we're likely to give that back in the new year. And we're hoping that perhaps we've progressed people to a point where they can consider taking another space on the high street, and we will be facilitating them to do that. At the same time, we were delivering a project in Wembley which looked at a slightly different issue, which was that there was loads and loads of empty space, not that many people who were ready or willing to use that space. They were really intimidated by it. Wembley is an area that's obviously very well known to most people, but locally people are kind of head down, carry on, a bit like it being in central London. There's a lot of things that happen to them rather than with them. There's a lot of redevelopment that's going on in the area, and on match days when they have 100,000 people swarming past their front door, that most people tend to hide away. So this project was really, how do we very intensively engage those people who may be interested in doing more human scale type activity in some of those empty spaces, to develop some businesses that might complement the very large scale regeneration that was going on. We did that from an empty shop, and ran mentoring sessions and one-to-one capacity building sessions with different types of people. We delivered action plans. We developed this concept of a Coming Soon Club, and at the end of a year we had 600 members who joined for free in return for an idea for using spaces. We really sort of garnered from them the different types of spaces that they wanted to use. Within the HQ space, they were able to use a window, they were able to use the whole space. It was all for free. We sort of developed their capacity to do that and supported them to do that. And once they were ready, we helped them move on to other spaces in the area. At the end of that year, we identified that perhaps there were people that didn't really need that sort of highly visible shop space, and perhaps wanted more kind of desk space or co-working space or studio space. And down the road, there was this empty petrol station, Cottrell House. And the landlords have actually, in the last few weeks, sold this. So they were looking for development partners, and we took the space on and did it up and ran co-design workshops with the members, and really designed how we could make a sort of a temporary but flexible space that people could use for all sorts of different kinds of uses, from co-working to networking, to craft markets on the forecourt. We've had dance studios and all sorts of different kind of university people using those spaces. We've had people progress from running fashion labels from their kitchen table to actually now running from multiple units and being the sort of face of the local London designer outlet, and really having a partnership with them. So it's been a really incredible platform for a lot of people. And now we're looking at taking on a larger office block around the corner for progressing that further now that that building has been sold. There's lots of barriers, so we've been asked to talk a little bit about the barriers and the practicalities and how to overcome them. And my general feeling is that you can get a bit hung up on the barriers, and a lot of them are so terrifying and scary that you wouldn't do it if you really stop to think about it too much. I think we've been taken to court now 4 times for business rates, having been employed by the council to deliver projects, and them not following through with promises for business rates exemptions, and you know how you make those pay. So our role as an enabling organisation is how we develop systems and guidance to support people to use those spaces. So we have methods for contacting landlords. We have template leases to support people to use spaces. We have sort of systems for dealing with the bureaucracies of the rates and health and safety and planning and licenses. And we usually develop a business case in each situation, even if it's only for couple of months to look at how best to use that space. But really, we think that actually, practically speaking, the real thing that you can't forget, that you need from everybody, is a lot of time and energy. It's about having physical people in those spaces on a daily basis, so that you can engage and interact with people and really sort of sell your idea of what you want to do. And it's about managing expectations, I think, of if you've got something on a temporary basis, how do you take that forward, and how do you manage each different partner's expectations for what it will look like and what it will achieve and the revenue that it may or may not bring in. Going forward, we will be continuing in London and the South East to do these very intensive projects that we deliver, but we're also looking at how we can take that elsewhere and developing an app that connects and sort of matches landlords with projects. So if that's something you're interested in, we'd like to bring that up here at some point. I'd be happy to talk to you about opportunities for doing that.
Wilton's Music Hall is a pretty much unique old music hall in what is really now the middle of London, but for a long time people thought, like many urban sort of setups, if it wasn't in the trendy part of town, people think it's miles away. It's just near the Tower of London. And it's got a funny history. It was a series of Georgian houses with a pub in the middle, and in the 1850s a man called John Wilton bought the pub. He bought the house on the left, he bought the house on the right, he bought 2 more houses, and he'd essentially got half a terrace to himself, and he built a music hall across their combined backyards, punctured through all the houses, and made this kind of sort of rabbit warren honeycomb building that we use today. It's had a fire, it was converted into a Methodist mission. And after the war, it was actually compulsory purchased and scheduled for demolition. And luckily, that local community campaigned really hard to save Wilton's. They actually knew it as a Methodist mission. They weren't really saving it as a music hall, but they were all cleared from the area, and everywhere was demolished, except for this building. They had written to Sir John Betjeman and various other celebrities who actually managed to get it listed, and it's a Grade 2-star listed building. But belonging to the council for so long and not having a use, it fell into disrepair, as buildings do, and it had been derelict since 1956. And in fact, property developers had sort of encroached into it over the years and knocked bits of it down and patched bits of it up and that kind of thing. And it's the sort of patchwork that we have today. So we have neighbours all around us and a wall in front of us. And so it's very hidden and tucked away. And in 2004, I formed this kind of trust to take it over, as it was quite densely populated around, but it was like a little derelict spot, and turn it into a kind of music hall for the modern day, really. And we've just started the final phase of our repair works, which are Heritage Lottery funded and will finish next summer. Wilton's has a nice history as a music hall. It was the sort of birthplace of Champagne Charlie. You can see on the picture in the middle the terrace at the front there, and the old terrace that used to be in front of it. So they're not particularly remarkable buildings in themselves. And it's quite sweet. There's a bit of pottery from the Methodist mission, who for years and years and years called themselves the name of the pub because they wanted to get sailors coming in from the docks thinking the music hall was still there, and then convert them and teach them more righteous ways of living and that kind of thing. And then you can see in the bottom corner there's a picture of Wilton's, a bird's eye view. That's what happened to it in the 1960s. So everything was demolished around it, and it was kind of in the middle of nowhere for a bit of time, even though the Tower of London is about 5 minutes to the right-hand side. And there's a bit of the interior of the hall. Few pictures. A proud person showing off pictures of building. That's the whole picture of the stage, looking out from the stage, and that's a picture from the balcony looking out, dressed up for a party. So there you can see the kind of plan of the music hall. The music hall's at the back, and there are the houses at the front. And actually, we've had to split our repair works into 2 halves, and this is, I guess, why I'm speaking here about meanwhile uses. When I first came to Wilton's, obviously being very derelict, very damaged with rot, and, you know, as you say, most important word is toilets, all kinds of things, no running water, no electricity. It hadn't been modernised since 1890 anyway, so there was quite a lot to do in the building, and that's probably why most people didn't want to touch it. And as you say, as everybody here knows, the more you start to get into the building, the bigger the problems you find and the more structural problems you find, and then you start to think, well, I really made a quite big mistake here. And perhaps if Meanwhile Uses I'd known about you 10 years ago, I would have just rung straight in their number and said, well, I've got an empty space here. If you wouldn't mind occupying it whilst I fundraise, that'd be great. And so we've done the main auditorium, and the bottom bit there of the houses are what we're fixing at the moment. So I don't think I'm going to say anything particularly groundbreaking here. The first things I did, other than get a phone line when I first moved into the building, was to call up all the film and photo shoot agencies, that kind of thing, people who are less worried about health and safety and licenses, this sort of thing, and actually developed some great relationships with these people. And they used it a lot, and I learned a lot from them about repairs. I actually made lots of deals with different kinds of film and photo shoot locations and agencies that they'd repair a bit of a building for me, even if it was a temporary repair, just so I could sort of inch in and use it a bit more and more. Small-scale productions. Obviously, Wilton has a great music hall in its backyard, so it wasn't really there wasn't really a question of what might you use it for, other than maybe this sort of thing. So you might do conferences or other seated events, that sort of thing, but it's very obviously a theatre. So introducing what I hope would be the end vision of more small-scale productions. Obviously running a bar. I can't say that's like its original use. It's a very good thing to do. Parties and weddings, many parties and weddings. And then just sort of trying to get out to find what people wanted to do, because most of the neighbours that I was working with actually did want Wiltons demolished because they wanted nicer flats next to them. So they had ignored it for a long time and were hoping that it would fall down. Didn't actually have any support to save it at all initially, because everybody wanted it out of the way, and for the nice flats that had been either side of it to be continued into the middle. So it took quite a long time to make people believe that this crumbly old place was nice, and that actually having a theatre on their doorstep might be a good idea. Everyone was terrified about noise and public and all these kinds of things that I'm sure many of you have come across before. And from my side anyway, the way that I sort of managed to get into the local community was through running health checks and things like that in some of the spaces, and deliberately giving them historical guided tours whilst they waited for their blood tests or their teeth to be cleaned and things like that, which sort of put us in a slightly different perspective, or it's a slightly different situation when we were all getting to know each other in the first place. Cinema clubs, meetings, readings, rehearsals, you name it. If you've got a space, you've really got to try everything, whether you invite people to use it or people come and find you. So the answer really was for Wiltons that you never say no to anybody, really. And luckily for us, in one of those cases, it was a charity that came to see us. They were looking for a venue to have a conference. It was the 15th anniversary of the Prince of Wales' Seeing is Believing charity, and I was very lucky to meet him. They also, being probably one of the Prince's charities, weren't fussed about the health and safety or the crumbling building or the lack of electrics either. So they had their conference, and at the end of it, he became Wilton's patron, which was a big game changer for us, from being a sort of a building that nobody wanted to fund or even see succeed in any way, to actually having a kind of stamp of approval. And so over time, we sort of met different people. Our local authority, as you say, is quite an important person to have on board. They had quite mixed views about how it was going to work, licensing, and actually I was really saved by our local health and safety officer. In those days, they used to come and inspect all the time before the sort of licensing laws changed. And we didn't pass a single regulation for anything. And we had a kind of deal that it was like a sort of gentleman's agreement. I wouldn't do anything that was going to put him in a lot of trouble if something went wrong. And he would have many other forms to fill in before he got to my report. And that's kind of how we bubbled along for about 4 years, in fact, until 2006, when I was able to apply for a premises license. And he's still a regular visitor today. He also introduced me to a local structural engineering firm, and he said, between me and him, why don't we just tag along like this? We're going to tape it all up and put lots of markers everywhere, and you just call if anything moves. And just kind of how it worked in the first days. And then you meet other experts, the Theatres Trust, Victorian Society, Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings, English Heritage. All, once you start to get to know all these different people and their expertise actually start to contribute to your understanding of what you can do and where you can go. And I dearly hope that, 10 years ago I would have loved a broker, but actually all these people ended up being sort of like lots of mini brokers for Wiltons. And your local fire brigade, your local police force. I mean, everybody's situation is different, but where we were initially was very dangerous, and I was constantly sort of having my windows smashed in. I was shot once, and it wasn't very, very friendly area. And it's important, particularly when you're inviting the public and you're telling them that all the wonderful theatre that you have. Oh, I will. That's what's known as your 12 minutes is up. And so you need a good group of people, and that they become your community, whether they live next door to you or their interests are with you, and your neighbours and your volunteers. And in Wilton's case, obviously the next biggest community that was important to its future and sustainability are the artists. And after you sort of filter all different opinions and you work around things, you start to find a way forward. And there were a lot of challenges that we faced. I don't think I'm going to say anything that, oh, that's all right, anyone doesn't know, but we didn't own the building to start off with, so we were a tenant. That made it quite complicated. The tenant, though, was a very, very amenable building preservation trust, but the responsibilities of the care and conservation of the building and the responsibilities of being an arts charity made it a large responsibility, and you're sort of speaking for two parties a lot of the time, because one party isn't often present when you're trying to talk to local authorities or funders, and you sort of say, oh, well, I'm a tenant, my landlord can't be here today, but I'd really like 4 million quid, and I'm going to spend it on his building, and he's cool with that. And please don't ask for any more paper. And also just the management and structure as you change as well. Often your meanwhile uses start to change you as an organisation. It certainly changed Wilton's. I think when we started out, we thought we were going to be very much a theatre, and actually now the thought of that, it isn't really what our purposes are anymore. So we've learned a lot from them, and our whole company has changed and merged. We actually managed to own the building in the end, which was the right move forward, but that made a huge change for the trust and board members. So it's, these are slow processes. We had a lot of issues with making the building disabled access, which we're now actually doing now. It was very complicated trying to work with the listing and making the routes and that sort of thing. So, I'd have to say it probably took about 2 years to finally decide on how we were going to get people around the building. And my only comments on health and safety are make friends with everybody that's involved in that industry. And definitely anybody who knows anything about steels and structures, floors, spreading weight, that sort of thing. And absorb as much as you can. And also, another thing I was asked to talk about was insurance and security, which, again, all I can say is, obviously, you shop around. That's what you do. You get your quotes. Don't show anybody every part of your building at any time, under any circumstances. And be prepared to be woken up at night quite a lot, either by the police or your conscience, one or the other. But I think... as you probably know from the things that you've done yourself, without being deeply irresponsible, there are just certain things that common sense dictates. You have to keep on moving forwards with the meanwhile use of a very derelict or sort of shaky building, because otherwise you're never going to get that momentum that I think most people seek to take you forward and to actually get to a point that you want to be there. And whilst you're open and in use, that was the best thing for Wilton's, because if we had stayed closed and just tried to fundraise for a lot of money without any track record, without any history, nobody in the area even knew of Wilton's because they had been cleared sort of 50 years earlier. So even the new neighbours that were next door didn't, they were the ones who didn't really want it developed, but didn't know its real history anyway. you never know who's going to walk in the door. And so even if you are offering teeth checks or you're running a film shoot, this is how I met the Prince's Seeing is Believing Trust, just because the door was always open. And obviously you learn from your mistakes, everybody does. And this kind of strange organic growth means that you start to become more equipped for your preferred use, and you start to find the kinds of volunteers that then become your teammates. You find the people that you know are good consultants or people who can help you in the long term. This is how you kind of develop your family and the community around you, so that you end up, hopefully, being in a position to be what you intended to be in the first place. That's fine. No, well, I don't know that I'm going to say anything that's sort of groundbreaking here, but otherwise the end use for Wilton's anyway is to be a sort of more of an arts and location hub for the area, and in fact now it mostly belongs to the local community, who've decided most of the uses of all the rooms, and it's actually turned out to be a really nice way forward.
I'm an architect in a small rural community in North England. The community, the parish, there's 2,000 people, and we're 20 miles from anywhere bigger. We have a large building, a derelict mill that we're interested in trying to restore and bring a new use into. There's a bit of uncertainty about what that use is going to be. Would you see a rural connection to very much what you've been doing, possibly in more urban situations?
Absolutely. I think that everybody needs to work, and the migration into cities is a big problem. If there are spaces that are around and not being used, then they could generate space for people to use them for whatever that might be. It's really just about, as Francis says, opening the doors is the main thing, and that's the sort of primary thing we do, certainly. We kind of land somewhere and we get it ready. And getting it ready is very, very basic. We get electrics going. We probably have a toilet, and that's probably about it. We clear it out. And then it depends what people want to use it for and what they come forward. If we have budget to do more with it, then great. But it's about getting the right people talking and kind of opening the doors and starting to build that community of interest of people who might be interested in using the space. So I don't think rural or urban really makes any difference. In fact, it's about whether you've got that community of people who are interested in trialling whatever it might be, any kind of use, and sort of building that up. It could be one person, it could be a number of different people. It sort of depends on the space itself and the opportunities for using it and what people want to do with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Michael Guy from English Heritage. Just wondered if you'd ever thought about, rather than an individual building, but as more of a portfolio, like a local authority or a government agency or, big departments, even like Ministry of Defence. Is there any bodies that you know of, or any, or even yourselves perhaps, who would ever consider taking on more than just a single building and approaching it in an organisational way to say, what have you got across all of your land, and what could we do with that to assist, perhaps? Perhaps, yeah, but also for the other two as well, just to say, you might say actually one building is more than enough to bite off and chew, and that's what you're talking about there is perhaps unachievable. But I know from my own experience that larger public bodies have an awful lot of estates, which they, to be honest, just hold and mothball. And although we often talk about individual owners being the problem, as in the private sector owners, it's often the publicly owned land that is more of a challenge.
I think there are certain synergies that once you've started to learn so much about running a building that you realise you could certainly help other people, and you start to make recommendations. You get to know other venues and places as well, and I think particularly in the sort of when you meet a lot of creative people, they've often dug out these places that are mothballed, and you can make proposals to use them. Sometimes it can be difficult to get into them. I think Wilton's probably works with about 5 other venues. I wouldn't say they are exactly the same as Wilton's, but they're a little bit derelict and they're quite difficult to get into, because we just informally provide a support base for performance companies to how to get in, how to get your temporary license, where we're going to get the bar set up, those kinds of things, and run their ticketing systems and some promotions for them. So I think it would be a really good idea actually to try and reach out, but as you said, you will try and fix the one you're in sometimes.
I'd say the same thing. We've been on our 14 acres now for 6 years, and we're still discovering new basements. So we've talked quite a few times about what if the whole place fell down, where would we go? We've been eyeing other places in the area. We definitely could expand, but while there's still sort of life in Temple Works, we're still rediscovering Temple Works. However, people do come and ask us for advice on similar projects all the time. We're very happy to help. But in terms of what Emily does, for instance, that's not our business model. If that was our business model, we'd probably go straight to Emily. Other than that, we're sort of doing our own spaces.
I think that mentoring role is very important, that whilst you focus maybe primarily on one building, the lessons learned can be disseminated to lots of others and can have a sort of a knock-on effect of benefit to a whole range of buildings. Emily, is there anything else you'd like to say on that question?
Absolutely. We've tried very hard to work with a lot of local authorities. A lot of them either come at it from the perspective of we don't have any empties, and which of course you know because you're walking past them and you can see them. Or their processes are just so difficult and complicated that by the time you get halfway with somebody, they've changed jobs and lost interest. But certainly we're about really sort of disrupting the property industry without really wanting to say that to too many people. But it's about how do we create a sort of a change within that system, that it's not okay to leave space empty, and a lot of that is about scale. And how many spaces you can do that in. It takes a lot of energy, and so I've only got a small team, and that's intentionally that case. But this is why we were developing this app, which is funded by the Technology Strategy Board, which is looking at how do we take inventory at scale and provide it to literally connect it with people who are ready to take it on. So I'd be really interested in talking to you about mass quantities. We're talking to Sainsbury's and people like that whose business models have changed, that they don't need their kind of back area spaces anymore. They don't need quite as many depots. They've sort of changed how they approach things. And it's those kind of landlords that we're certainly talking to. But local authorities, yes. The government did look to do something a couple of years ago, and I don't know how successful it's really been. And we talked to them about all sorts of different buildings, and they just, for exactly the same reasons, never really got anywhere. But it's something that I'd like to see happen, definitely.
Out of interest, following on, there's a question there. Yeah, go ahead.
Talk about the talking about the Temple Mills, is there a tension between getting use and actually not an unused building, but also the longer term conservation or long term sustaining of that building in a conservation manner? Because we've obviously, when you said, well, if it falls down, we'll go somewhere else. Now, that's obviously means there's a lot of people who benefited from the use of that building, but the building's gone now. And I know the uniqueness. How do you balance between, I'm an architect, a sort of a correct, whatever that means, conservation project and an active living building, which may have may die. That's.
We have no intention of letting it die. And if we weren't there, it probably would have long since. So we're quite proud of the fact that we do all the maintenance, and we're just artists. And I'm an architect too. I think that there is no tension except for a creative tension about how you do something wonderful in a wonderful space. It was Kay's catalogue for a long time, and they did not maintain it. The maintenance has been extensive since we started. The big difficulty is the very big main space, the Temple Mill floor, which has unique engineering issues. When I said if it fell down, I was being flippant, but as I say, we have no intention of letting it. We listen to it every day. Conservation is absolutely an issue. but the much bigger issue is looking at the structure itself in a very modern kind of way. The engineering solution which the Bonomies came up with was the bodge job of all time, and the engineers who've looked at it since, two sets of engineers, were looking at it as a masonry issue rather than as a tensile cast iron element issue. So there's, I'd say in some ways the tension is between different forms of engineers rather than the people using it now who love it and those who used to use it.
Well, we started 5 minutes late, so I'm hoping we can we have another 5 minutes here? Yes. So, any other questions? Yes.
Ian Bapty from the Iron Bridge Gorge Museum Trust, working on a project to support industrial heritage groups nationally. A question perhaps for both Francis and the Temple site, and maybe the others in London as well, which relates specifically to heritage listing. I noticed that Wilton's had a very high listing, grade 2 star. How do you navigate your way around the issues there with meanwhile uses? I noticed you mentioned, Francis, that one of your quid pro quo arrangements was to get groups coming in to do a bit of maintenance sometimes. How did you manage to build a relationship with English Heritage to help you work that?
I did actually. When I first arrived, I contacted English Heritage, and because to put it out there, I actually knew nothing about old buildings at all, and I didn't really know what listing meant. And then I discovered that actually lots of buildings only have bits listed. So so it wasn't even all as listed as I thought it was, or something like that. And I didn't really understand what the issues were with it. And English Heritage explained it very clearly and concisely. And when I talked about what we were going to try and do in the future, they said, well, these are probably the best ways of going forward. You should get a structural survey, a condition survey, just get your ducks in a row, find out what's wrong with the building, and then you need to really think about, are you going to restore this building? Are you going to conserve it? Do you like it the way it is? They sort of laid out some options, told me to go and speak to people at the Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings, and they actually recommended a few people to talk to, sort of architectural historians, and I went and chatted to them all. One of them became a trustee, one of them wrote my conservation management plan in the end, who helped me understand what it is to understand what about a character of a building and how important that is, and then access into the building. And there was a point where actually one of my teammates who had come from SPAB and done a lot of conservation, I think she'd done a degree in it as well, actually quit because there was a small staircase that she really believed so passionately shouldn't be removed to make way for a lift, that she left because it was so against her principles. And I've sort of met people of all different persuasions, but you've got to make it work. People have to use it, and it has to work as in the right way. And so some bits you do have to let go of. And Wilton's, I've been there for 10 years, and we only really started getting money to fix it about 3 years ago. So there's been huge amounts of maintenance, lots and lots of help from all the different film companies and theatre companies that come in there. And sometimes you hit lucky, like a very wealthy jeweller did an exhibition there. He wanted to use a room that had no floor. He put the floor in. What can I say? So yeah, you sort of rock around those bits, and you just keep on with your structural engineers, I'm sure you know, just checking that the floor that they put in is going to take the people that they say it's going to take. And we just rolled around like that. I think it was a bit hit and miss maybe when you look back at it, but there didn't seem any other. You just kind of deal with the day-to-day all the time. These days we have 10-year management plans and maintenance funds and things, but to start off with, it was just whatever you can do, and you might not have the right to climb on your roof and clean out all those gutters and put gaffer tape over all the holes, but if you don't do it, no one's going to do it, so just get up there and do it. So it's a mixed bag, I think. You just got to keep focusing on the end.
Just very quickly, for Temple Works, the current owners had done extensive investigations in terms of management plans. I helped them write it. There were something like 4 A4 pages of consultants involved with the project. So it's more recently that we've been doing maintenance. There always has been a very, very detailed plan for its care.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting subject that you've raised, really, about just how far is it appropriate to adapt buildings to meanwhile uses, but that's for another day. Thank you very much to the three speakers, and thank you to all of you to coming.